my life story intersected with having an appreciation for H.F. Reynolds was when I was in high school, and that's going to be kind of a weird thing to say, except that our pastor, Eugene Sanders, was just convinced that I was going to be a pastor, and he sent me as a delegate to the Northeast Oklahoma District Assembly, and I stayed with a great aunt who had grown up at Olivet before it was at Kankakee, and when they were still at Olivet, Illinois, and I was beginning to have some interest in the history of the church, and I asked her who her favorite preacher was, and she talked about H.F. Reynolds. And it's interesting that Dr. A.F. Harper at Nazarene Seminary told me the same thing. He said this a picturesque preacher was what he remembered, and it's interesting. It was interesting to me that they would choose him because he's less known than some. And went to Bethany for my undergraduate work to SNU, and then for a Master of Arts, and then got a Master of Religious Education from seminary. And then we were still in the Kansas City area, and had the opportunity to go to the University of Kansas and majored in education policy and administration. And they were working with such a broad definition of education. Education is anything that one culture does to communicate its values to another culture. Well, that fit in perfectly with what Reynolds had done in world missions, and presented that idea to my major professor, who is one of the major professors of childhood history in the United States, and he thought it would be a great story to tell, and started doing the investigating and did the research. And one year when we went to General Assembly at Indianapolis, we drove up to the Chicago area because I knew Reynolds had been born just south of Chicago in Lyons, Illinois, and doing on-the-ground research, you could tell how some of this story developed. The relative difficulties that he experienced, the first marriage and that failed, and all that takes place before he becomes a Christian. And yet it is an important part of the story in the 21st century, because here you can say, here is this man who was totally transformed between the ages of 20 and 25. By the time he's 25, God has done something in his heart to plant in him a vision that is just astounding in terms of vision. The sense of vision becomes the whole driving story for him, and he'll go wherever the Methodists send him to plant a church. He went to Dixville Notch, New Hampshire, and they never did successfully get a church started there. I checked with their archives in New Hampshire, and he said we didn't ever get one started. We had somebody try to start a Sunday school, and that was H.F. Reynolds. And the interesting thing about that was, while he and his wife were starting a Sunday school in Dixville Notch, they have a little boy in their classes who just falls in love with Dr. and Mrs. Reynolds. And 50 years later, Calvin Coolidge sends them a letter from the White House inviting them to come have dinner with him, which was just an unbelievable story. It was true, but it was just amazing to me. Even in areas where it didn't look like things worked out, God did amazing things in his life. And there were other things, almost all of it related to world mission and a sense of vision for the whole world. Wherever he went, the world missions followed. And so all of those things pulled together a life story for me that really was compelling. The sense of vision, it never stopped. Dr. Ralph Earl told me, even when he was physically infirm and could not get about easily when he was in Wollaston at ENC, he said the one thing that was ingrained in his memory was that Dr. Reynolds would sit at a trolley station waiting for the next trolley or bus, whichever was coming next. And if he didn't see anything coming, he'd take off his hat. And in the band of his hat, he had a list of the names of every Nazarene missionary around the world. And he'd just sit there and start praying for them. He said, he would say, I may be 82, but I can pray for our missionaries. And that was just as true at the end of his life as it was when he first came to Jesus. And the other thing about that was he wrote, again, come back to the very beginning. He said it's been 50 years since I have been to the place where I first met Jesus. But if somebody flew me over the place in an airplane, I know that I could point to them and say, that is where I met Jesus as Savior and Lord. He could not forget or ever walk away from that, which was really pretty cool. I thought that was, it was the essence of it. It's all about meeting Jesus and then introducing him to the people that you meet as well.